Welcome once again, everybody, to Navigate. I'm your host, Tim Austin, and this is the podcast designed to help you take the guesswork out of transition. Whether you have a transition looming in your future or you're trying to make sense out of a past or a current transition, this show will help you think more creatively and plan more strategically around any transition season you find yourself in. At Navigate, it's about leveraging the challenges of change for optimal growth. It is a privilege for me to introduce this 40th episode of Navigate, especially for the fact that it marks the completion of 3 conversations, one with each of my adult third culture kids. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with the term third culture kid, or TCK for short, let me encourage you to have a listen to the episode 39, where my good friend Chad Phillips does a great job of unpacking that for us. But today's conversation is with my son, Luke Austin. Luke has spent the majority of his life outside of his passport country, the United States. As a family, we lived and worked in Central Asia and Turkey, all together for about 20 years, before returning to the U.S. in 2016. And that was the summer Luke graduated from high school. Luke currently lives with his wife Maria in Chicago, where he works as a digital marketing team leader with an Orange County-based company. We recently had the opportunity to return to Turkey as a family for a brief visit, and this conversation takes place from there. And just a heads up, there's an added touch of realism to this conversation. The context is outside on the terrace of our guest apartment where we were staying in Istanbul. And we had some gusty winds to deal with that night. Nonetheless, I think you're going to enjoy getting to know my son, Luke Austin. So let's dive in. It's a great place for us to be here, sitting up here on our terrace in the middle of a really cool place in Istanbul called Kadıköy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so why don't you give our listeners a sketch of who you are, Luke, and a little bit about where you've been and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So first time being back here, I think in two or 3 years. Last time I was back here, we were back here together, was right around a month before Maria and I got married. So crazy looking back on the past couple of years and all that's happened during that time. But prior to that, let's see, we moved back from Turkey, I think 2016 was the year, and then straight from there, went to college at Biola University, studied business administration, bachelor's in business administration with a marketing concentration. So I was there for about 3 years. I finished up my senior year online while I was working full-time, because Maria and I, then we met early on at Biola, dated for a couple years, and then got engaged and then got married. Just that we'll be coming up on our anniversary here in just a couple weeks. So that's kind of been those few years. So right after Biola then and being there full-time, I started an internship during the summer of my sophomore year at a digital advertising agency, pretty close by to Biola, about 30 minutes or so in Newport area. So I was there for a summer internship, went back to school for my kind of capstone year, and then came back to start full-time at that same company, where I've been at now for about 2.5 years or so. Since that time, 2 years, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. So, kind of where I'm at, and we lived for our first year and a half, almost 2 years in Southern California. Maria and I did after getting married, and then we just recently moved to Chicago, where she's now working full time as an oncology nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. My company's fully remote now, as many are, and so I started a new chapter. Been in Chicago now for about 4 months or so.
Great. So yeah, it's nice that you have that flexibility, isn't it, to be able to move, work remotely, where and kind of keep that gig going wherever you go, wherever a job opens up. So that's must feel pretty good about just kind of how that flexibility fit in for you with the move from California, being able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that also is sort of a I don't know, like a temptation, not to be negative all the time, but at different times, that sort of flexibility, I think there's potential downfalls to it as well, just because it's easy to want to think of new places to live, and next year we move here, let's try this the other year, and never really get rooted down, especially growing up as a TCK. So that's something interesting that we've had, Maria and I have conversations about, and things that I think about, but the flexibility is really nice for sure.
Yeah. Well, okay. So first it was Tajikistan, and you grew up a big part of your kid years in Tajikistan, Central Asia. Then we moved, when you were a teenager, we moved to Turkey. So, and by the way, for our listeners, if they hear a lot of background noise and some seagulls flying around and whatever else, this is a big, noisy city. So we thought we'd try it out here on the terrace tonight and see, kind of give a little reality to the podcast, this podcast episode. But anyways, so what we're going back to growing up overseas and living cross-culturally, you obviously didn't have a say in that. You were pretty much, you were born in the States, but you were a baby when we brought you back to Central Asia. But what were some of the best parts of growing up in Tajikistan and or Turkey? What were some of the most difficult, challenging parts? But what were some of the highs and lows?
Yeah. So a lot of both for sure. I think, especially over the past few years, in college, I started realizing these things more, and then now, in my career working in the e-commerce growth and at the company I'm at, with my coworkers and the people on my team, also like some of these things are becoming more clear or just distinct, I guess, and trying to reflect back on growing up and how that's impacted how I operate maybe differently than other people, and just kind of normal things where they have conversations or different interactions or doing a certain job, and just thinking like, okay, this, for some reason my brain works differently than other people's, or I naturally kind of interact differently with people than the majority of people in my workplace, regarding this certain thing. So anyway, I think a lot of those benefits and challenges are still being clarified, and will continue to be in the future for me as I get into different scenarios and have different experiences, either in the States or abroad, and then kind of question, wow, that's interesting. I didn't think maybe this part of me was different, but now in this situation, something is being highlighted. How has maybe my unique experience growing up overseas impacted that? But more recently, so over these past few years, within that context, I think a few distinct ones have stood out. One of those being, I guess the way to put it would just be the benefit I see in diversity or differences of people, and also the ability to just really easily navigate that. So in college, and then that playing out in the workplace as well with my coworkers and people on my team. And I think so. A story that kind of relates to that, when we were here in Istanbul, Turkey, is I met a very good friend of mine He's from Iran originally, but him and his family have lived in multiple countries together. So him and I became very good friends during high school, and we wanted to start playing music together just for fun, because he played hand percussion and I played different hand percussive instruments at the time as well. And so him and I would kind of mess around, and then other people at our school who were musical, we started having conversations with, and just thinking, hey, we could get like a little group together. And then anyone who's been to Istanbul, you know how many street musicians and buskers there are around the town. And so we thought, hey, what if we could make some money doing this and kind of get some crowds and do this on the street? And I guess it's not like a super difficult problem to solve or situation to kind of navigate through, but it's not normal that a sophomore or a couple sophomores in high school of very different ethnicities and backgrounds, one an Iranian refugee and one white guy from California, would say, hey, let's play music together, and not think twice about that, right. Build a friendship, and then bring together a music group of, I think we had 4 or 5 different nationalities and backgrounds, couple Koreans, Iranian, myself, Turk, a guy from another Southeast Asian country. Bring this group together, orchestrate it, find out different songs and music that we could play, and then go on the streets of Istanbul. We would play improv music and draw crowds, have a ton of fun, and make some money too. Yeah. And that sort of like diversity and in the makeup of that group was a real benefit to us, because we had all this different musical background. I mean, we'd be playing songs that had like Southeast Asian, Middle Eastern, and rock and roll kind of like notes to them all throughout, just because of how the group was made up. But people loved the music and we loved playing it as well, and it worked. So that was a benefit to us. And also a situation like that required some cross-cultural kind of communication and relationship building as well. And I think I've seen that, groups of people, whether those be, different friendships or within the workplace, groups of people that are of different genders, nationalities, have different religious backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, whatever it may be, I don't really think twice about it, because it's just kind of normal. Yeah. That sort of makeup of people, and then being able to communicate and bring those people together and lead them within a team is something that just really comes more naturally to me. And so, I think that's one thing that I've reflected on, just that this is, I think, a benefit, sort of a competitive advantage I have within the marketplace.
Yeah, and there's a lot of negotiation skills that were learned, I think, in that time of your life, right? You know, at such a young age, you're negotiating these different relationships and value systems that everybody brings to the table. What music are we going to play? How are we going to do it? Negotiating with the other bands on the streets, maybe this is our space, this is your space, or whatever you had to negotiate there. It seems like, as I've watched you and kind of observed from my perspective as a parent, I've seen how a lot of those negotiation skills have really helped you navigate cross-culturally growing up as a TCK, but also beyond that, in just terms of your relationships and now your career in what you do now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that piece as well, which I think is really true. And within my current role at my company, I've had, I would say, like, relative success to people in the other similar positions in terms of how I've been able to navigate, client contracts or growing our current our current client relationships, how I've been able to bring on other platforms and tests to get our clients to opt into those. But really, those are just negotiation conversations, right? Where it's trying to find a happy medium or something that benefits every party, trying to identify that and then bring everyone together and move forward towards that, which is interesting. And also this is being back in Istanbul this time. I didn't realize this, but it's not as prevalent in the U.S., even in bigger cities in the U.S., to as close of an extent as it is in places like Istanbul or Cairo. I mean, even Dushanbe at the markets, but selling you're always being sold to here, even as a local. I mean, not as much so as a local, but everyone, whether you're a local or foreigner, you're always being sold to, not because, it's just some slimy sales culture, but there's always people on the streets trying to get people to come to their restaurant, welcome them in. They're trying to upsell, the better fish at dinner, like what happened last night. And I think there's something really beneficial in being part of that as well, where being able to sell something is a skill that benefits, that can benefit everyone in every industry and is needed to grow any sort of business. And so people who aren't like scared of selling things, or that to them seems like, oh, this is a normal part of just everyday life. That's also a piece of that kind of sales and negotiation, those two together, where that I think may become more naturally for TCKs who have grown up in a similar context rather than people who haven't.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and I remember just as a side here, I think that, your mom and I would sometimes, as we were in the bazaars buying things, trying to purchase items, I remember leaning on you often for the negotiating skills that you brought to get a good deal and to work with somebody. I didn't have the patience for it, and I think you excelled also in language pretty quickly, so that helped you as well. You weren't afraid to get out there and just use what you had and build on it in terms of the language, and so all of that brings you to this place where you're now finished college, you're now married, you're into your career. What's next? What do you feel like is next for you?
Yeah, we're not sure, and I think going back to I had mentioned this briefly earlier, but one of the challenges as well is how easy it is to growing up, even if TCKs grew up in one country their whole life, they would be traveling a lot, right, to different summer conferences or going back to the States for itineration or just different engagements their parents had maybe in other countries, or in most cases, whether it's the TCKs would be maybe 2 or 3 years in one place at most, and that's pretty normal, and then moving around to another place. So in any of those scenarios, whether it's more consistent or there's a lot more change, I think moving around and not digging, setting deep roots in a certain place is a common challenge for TCKs. And I think for me specifically, that is one of the challenges, is just always thinking about what's next, and in the back of my mind thinking, oh, there's going to be change coming. Oh, we're going to be leaving soon anyway, or we're probably moving on to something next. So in my job, what's next? I've been in this role for 6 months now. That's crazy. I mean, it's 6 months in one role is not that long, even in a fast-paced industry. So that's looking forward to that, and then also us moving to Chicago. The place we were at in Southern California before this, we were like, oh, we could be here. We want to be here over a year, maybe 2 years. We ended up being there for 9 months, and then we went to Chicago. There, COVID and different things like that had an impact. And even now in Chicago, we're thinking, where else could we live besides that? But I think even more myself, thinking about what's next or what could be next.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the challenges is dreaming about the future, but not in a way that inhibits me from digging deep into where it's now. Because for me, it seems binary. Like I'm either thinking about the future, which means I'm not present in now, or I'm not thinking about the future at all, which means I'm really present now, but I don't have any thoughts on what's coming next. So for us, I mean, really right now, we want to dig roots deep in Chicago and have joined a really great church there. We're in Bible studies separately, as well as a group together. Starting to play pickup basketball with some guys once or twice a week as well. Maria's really loving her job and getting to know people on her floor of the hospital. So we're really wanting to just set deep roots, build some deep relationships, do well in our specific careers during this time in Chicago, and not be thinking as much about, okay, what's next, or at least planning for that. And I think that's honestly like kind of as far as we've gotten. We definitely want to have kids at some point, but again, want to, like, Maria just started working full time. Yeah, what was that, 4 or 5 months ago? So she wants to be working for a substantial period of time before we would have kids. So yeah, that's kind of the extent of what we've been thinking and talking through.
Yeah. Well, and community and connection and rootedness is so important, especially for TCKs to, when they make that big transition. There's a lot of transitions they're navigating throughout their growing up lives. A lot of shorter term transitions or in between times when they're having to, but this is that, high school to college, back to their passport country. That's a big adjustment. And what your mom and I saw you do, which we really recommend that every TCK who goes, is making that big shift and change, is to find community, find connection. And it can be really hard to do. And so I feel like you navigated that well in college, even as a single adult, plugging into a church and leading worship once in a while in church, and just getting plugged in ways that help you feel connected and rooted in some way.
No, I agree. It's so important, and I think, I think I knew how important that was, but still, it was very difficult to make it happen, like you were saying. And I think even like taking one step back or going, one step deeper, or I don't know, making it even more simple is just for me, challenging myself to just show up. Just show up with the new Bible study group. Not knowing if I want to go a certain week and just make small talk yet again for the 5th week in a row with all these people I don't know, and just telling myself, just keep showing up, because that's how the relationships get built. That's how you build the experience in the workplace. That's how you, at least build the base blocks for a healthy relationship with a significant other as well. It's just keep showing up and being present. And it takes time, and some days that you show up, or weeks, it just feels like no progress is made, or maybe it was one step back. But the next day or the next week, then it's 2 steps forward and there's progress being made. So I think, that's so important. And at least for myself, just showing up and putting in the time there, and trusting that the roots will, set down and grow over time is, really important.
Yeah. Good advice. Well, coming back, here we are, as we said when we started this conversation, we're back in Turkey just for a brief visit. It's been great to revisit some of our old hangouts and restaurants, and getting on the ferry, which we love to do, and connecting with some of our friends that are still here, and just the just reliving or, a lot of this, but this is unique because you brought your wife, Maria. How does that feel to you? How does it feel to her? I don't know if you've really had a time to debrief that or talk about it, but how do you think it might feel to her? What does it mean for you? And would you recommend that for, obviously there's a lot of TCKs who go back to their passport countries and get married, and do their spouses ever get to see where they lived and grew up? Maybe not. Or their girlfriends or someone they're, if they're engaged, just why is that important? And what makes this time significant for you guys?
Yeah. So I think it is helpful or important, at least thinking about like before, like Maria had never been to Istanbul, Turkey or Dushanbe, Tajikistan before we had gotten married. So she had just seen pictures of both of those places, basically, and I heard some stories. So that was the extent to the context she had on those places. So I would say that isn't like a necessity, at least for us, hasn't been a necessity in us, building our marriage together over these couple years now. So I don't know if that like thinking of before marriage is as much of a necessity, just as much as I guess. So Maria had gone on multiple trips to Central America, as well as to Israel, and so she was and her dad's an airline pilot, so she's very familiar and had traveled a lot growing up, and so I think honestly the travel piece I don't know how. I think it would have been more difficult for us if the travel piece wasn't a commonality between us, that we had both traveled a lot growing up and were comfortable traveling together, because it's such a big part of my life, like being on planes. And like the TCK joke is that airports feel most like home than any other place, kind of thing, right? Yeah. So and for her, I mean, they have kind of a similar joke in their family as well, because they spend so much time flying in, and her dad's in so many airports all the time and all that. So I think that is a very important piece, and something early on when we were dating that that I wanted to make sure was at least some sort of commonality that we had, because I feel like I thought it would have been difficult to build off that. But thinking about now, being in Istanbul, I think it's awesome because it's just another shared experience that has a lot of, it's a really unique shared experience that her and I have together now, that over time, like they, again, like I don't think it's a necessity for a successful relationship or long term, but to bring additional just like joy and memories and happiness within our relationship. Like having these memories, this unique experience in Istanbul is awesome, because we'll be able to look back on this in the coming years, and inside jokes from the trip and just different places and talk about that. And so I think that is so worth it. It's like an investment that pays dividends, because we'll for the years to come, we'll be able to reap the joy of the memories that we've built here in this place together.
And you'll have something else drawing you back together, because I imagine you'll probably come back here to this place together at some point again, and maybe again, and maybe again. And it's just like this connection. Not only did you grow up, part of your growing up years were here, but now you bring her into this experience, and then you share that together. I just think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think another piece of it too is a lot of TCKs will go and move back to one of their home, the countries they grew up in, either by themselves or with their partner, their significant other later on, or that's, I think, an option that is like more on the table for TCKs, at least with other TCK
Right.
friends of mine that I've talked to. It's just like, oh, well, would you, you lived in Istanbul, would you guys ever think about moving back there, kind of thing? And so now we can kind of make that sort of decision better together, because she has never been to Istanbul. And so even if, like, before this trip over the past couple of years, we've had kind of short conversations, or me just also joking, hey, do you want to move to Istanbul, kind of thing. And for her, like, she's never been, so it's so difficult to kind of put specifics around what that would look like. But now we can, if that is something that it's an option that's presented for either us in our works, or something that we believe the Lord is calling us to in moving overseas to a different country, then we can kind of co-make that decision better together, because we'll have context for Istanbul specifically. Yeah. And I think that's super helpful as well, rather than talking about it kind of like abstractly.
Yeah. It makes it less of, it's a big leap, but it makes it less of a big leap when you're both, you both had this experience here together, and you take that into your future together.
Definitely.
Yeah. Good. Well, as we wrap up our time on the terrace here in Istanbul, what's some advice you might give to a third culture kid? Maybe they're feeling stuck in some way at some point in their journey of transition, especially as we've talked about, maybe in the move back, maybe in anticipating a big move. Maybe they're, high school, getting ready for college, or just any advice you might give to a third culture kid in that big season of change and adjustment.
Yeah, I think it would go back to the community piece that you had mentioned earlier, and we talked about quickly. And when I came back for college, that was something when we come back for furloughs growing up to the States. It was easy to be drawn into random different groups of friends or community, just based on what was easiest. And a lot of times the easiest route is not the most beneficial route. Basically, like, maybe hanging out with not the best crowd, or people who are not the best influence, just because it's easy to kind of take the shortcut and just want to be accepted and do that. And so coming back to college, I knew the step one for me, so that I didn't fall into any of that or just take the easy route out, is find one or two other people that are like-minded, and like-minded not just in general, like in faith, but in kind of how they practice their how they live out their lives, some of their interests, but then also like actively practice out their faith, so that I know I can have someone to back me up, and we can just keep each other accountable. And so, first week of college, that was goal number one for me, was like, just find a tight group of people that we can all say, hey, we're in this together. It's a new place, but we want to live to a certain standard. These are kind of our priorities, agree on those loosely, and then build off of that. And so I think that's super important, being really intentional. That takes a lot of energy, and intentionality initially. But once that's there, it's so worth it, because then you just got to go back to the thing. Then you just got to keep showing up each day and saying, cool, I'm going to keep investing in this relationship, keep investing. And then over time, those friendships grow and other relationships come out of those, because there's kind of a stable, there's some sort of stability in the midst of all the change going on. So, I think that would be the biggest one for me.
Great advice. Find community, find connection, make that your goal, and then keep showing up and keep investing. Great advice, Luke. For anybody, not just TCK, but anybody making a big transition into a new place, a new community, moving, because we talk about on this podcast a lot about a lot of different aspects of transition. But what you're saying, I think, applies to many, many kinds of transitions that we make in life. So good word, good advice. And thanks for joining me.
Yeah, of course. It's fun.
All right. Talk to you later. I love the universal wisdom which comes out of this conversation with Luke Austin. It reminds us that significant transitions invite us to set our priorities and keep showing up, as Luke said it. What about the transition season you're in? Is there an invitation in there somewhere to keep showing up, even when it's difficult, to lean into your strengths and what you've learned to leverage the opportunities in the here and now? Luke said his step one was to find one or two like-minded friends and invite them into his journey of intentionality, to have his back, to keep him accountable. What's your step one in this transition season? Whether you're needing support for a personal transition or you're helping others navigate a transition, you won't want to miss this opportunity to attend my 1-hour Tools for Transition online workshop. To register, just head over to encompasslifecoaching.com/workshops, and there you'll have 2 dates to choose from. It's a live event, and when you register, you'll also get access to my personal transitions resource packet, which I've designed to go with the workshop. So looking forward to having you join me for that. Thanks again for joining me for this episode of Navigate. I've been your host, Tim Austin, and in addition to this podcast, you'll also find me hanging out at encompasslifecoaching.com as a coach and a blogger. I hope this has been helpful to you, and if it has, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode. And I'll catch you next time.